We are told that freedom is the most important thing a human being can have. But in the winter of 1904, a nurse named Mary Holt proved that wrong. She escaped a house of horrors on the cold coast of Maine. She was safe, she was free, and then she turned around and walked back inside. To understand why, we have to look at what and who she left behind in the dark.
The job offer did not say much. It only said that a private home in Maine needed a nurse for a special case. It said the pay was very high, 3 times what a normal hospital would pay. For Mary Holt, that was all she needed to know. She was 24 years old, she had no family, and she had debts that kept her awake at night. She arrived in November of 1904. The train took her as far as the coast, and then a small fishing boat took her the rest of the way. The house wasn't on the mainland. It was on a tall, sharp rock of an island about a mile out in the freezing Atlantic water. As the boat got closer, Mary looked up. The house was huge. It was made of dark gray stone that looked wet even when it wasn't raining. It had no neighbors, no trees, just the stone house and the ocean crashing against the rocks below. The boat captain didn't help her with her bags. He just dropped her on the wooden dock and left as fast as he could. Mary walked up the long, winding path to the front door. The wind was so cold it hurt her face. She knocked on the heavy wood door, and after a long minute, it opened. A tall man stood there. He was thin, with glasses that reflected the gray sky. He didn't smile. "Miss Holt?" he asked. His voice was very quiet. "Yes, sir. I'm here for Dr. Morriston." "I am Dr. Morriston. Come inside. You are letting the heat out." The inside of the house was not like a home. It felt like a hospital, but darker. The walls were bare stone. There were no paintings, no carpets, no flowers. It smelled like cleaning chemicals and old dust. Dr. Morriston led her to his office. He sat behind a large desk and looked at her for a long time without blinking. "Do you know why I hired you, Miss Holt?" he asked. "To care for a child, sir." The letter said a sick child. "Not sick," the doctor corrected her. "Broken, and we are not here to fix him with medicine. We are here to fix him with order." He slid a piece of paper across the desk. It was a list of rules. "This is an experiment," Dr. Morriston said. "I am studying how the human mind grows when it is kept completely calm. The boy upstairs, ... His name is Thomas. He is 7 years old. He has lived here since he was born." Mary looked at the list. The rules were strange. Never speak to the child unless necessary. Never touch the child unless he is in danger. Never make loud noises near the room. Never look him in the eye for more than 3 seconds. Why these rules? Mary asked, feeling a small knot of worry in her stomach. "Because Thomas is sensitive," the doctor said. He stood up. "Emotion makes him weak. Affection makes him confused. We are teaching him to be self-reliant, to be strong. If you coddle him, you will ruin 7 years of my work. Do you understand?" "I understand," Mary lied. She needed the money. "Good. Put your bags in your room. Then go to the 3rd floor. It is the only door at the end of the hall. There is a viewing window. Go look at your patient." Mary went to her room, which was small and cold. She put her bag on the bed. The house was silent, completely silent. No floorboards creaked. No pipes groaned. It felt like the house was holding its breath. She walked up the stairs to the 3rd floor. The hallway was long and shadowed. At the very end, there was a heavy iron door. It looked like a prison door. In the center of the door, at eye level, was a small square of glass. Mary walked up to it. Her heart was beating fast. She leaned forward and looked through the glass into the room. It was a white room. White walls, white floor, white bed. And sitting in the middle of the floor, facing away from her, was a small boy. He was perfectly still. He looked like a doll that someone had dropped and forgotten. Then, slowly, The boy turned his head. He didn't look at the door. He looked right at the glass. Right at Mary. His eyes were wide and dark, and his face had no expression at all. It was the emptiest face Mary had ever seen. The first week at the house was not scary because of ghosts or monsters. It was scary because of the silence. There was no sound in the house. Dr. Morriston spent all day in his study with the door closed. The only noise came from the ocean outside, hitting the rocks. Mary felt like she was the only living person in the world. Her main job was simple but terrible. 3 times a day, she had to feed Thomas. But she was not allowed to go into the room. She was not allowed to sit with him or talk to him. The heavy iron door had a special metal drawer at the bottom. It was like a drawer in a bank. Mary would put the food on a metal tray, put the tray in the drawer, and push it through the wall. The food was always the same. Plain oatmeal, boiled potatoes, and water. No sugar, no salt, no meat. Flavor excites the senses, Dr. Morriston told her one morning while she prepared the tray. We want him to be calm. Boring food makes a boring mind. On her 3rd day, Mary knelt down by the door. She placed the tray in the slot. She pushed it through. Then she did something she wasn't supposed to do. She bent down and looked through the tiny gap before the drawer closed. She wanted to see him eat. She wanted to see if he liked it. On the other side, Thomas sat on the floor. He didn't rush to the food. He didn't look hungry, even though he was very thin. He picked up the spoon slowly. His movements were smooth and perfect, like a machine. He ate 1 spoon of oatmeal. Then he put the spoon down. He waited exactly 10 seconds. Then he took another bite. He ate like he was following a clock in his head. Mary felt a chill go down her back. It wasn't natural. Children are messy. Children rush. Children play with their food. Thomas was just functioning. Later that afternoon, Mary was cleaning the hallway. She saw Dr. Morriston standing by the door. He was looking through the glass window, watching the boy. He had a notebook in his hand, and he was writing fast. "He is doing well," Morriston whispered. He didn't look at Mary. "He looks lonely, Doctor," Mary said. She used her bravest voice. "He is just a little boy. He needs to play. He needs a mother, or at least a friend." Dr. Morriston stopped writing. He turned his head slowly to look at her. His glasses caught the light, hiding his eyes. "Loneliness is a feeling, Miss Holt," he said. "Thomas does not know what a mother is. He does not know what a friend is. You cannot miss something you never had. To him, this room is the whole world. He is not lonely. He is complete." "But it's cruel," Mary said. The word slipped out before she could stop it. Morriston stepped closer to her. He smelled like old paper and cold medicine. "Cruel? Out there in the world, people lie. People hurt each other. People die and leave you sad. In here, Thomas is safe. He will never be sad. He will never be heartbroken. I am saving him from pain. That is not cruel, Miss Holt. That is the greatest love of all." He tapped his pen on his notebook. "Stick to the rules. If you speak to him, you introduce chaos. If you smile at him, you teach him to need approval. Do not break my subject." Mary went back to her room that night, but she couldn't sleep. The doctor's words spun in her head. He truly believed he was doing a good thing. That was the worst part. He wasn't trying to be evil. He thought he was a savior. Around midnight, Mary woke up. The house was quiet, but she heard a sound. It was very faint. Tap, tap. It was coming from the ceiling, or the floor above. She sat up. The room above hers was the quiet room, the white room where Thomas lived. Tap, tap. It was a rhythm, slow and steady. It didn't sound like a child playing. It sounded like someone trying to send a message. Mary put on her robe and opened her door. The hallway was dark. She looked up toward the stairs. The tapping stopped. But then she heard something else. A sound that made her blood turn to ice. From behind the heavy iron door on the third floor, a small voice was humming. It wasn't a song. It was just one low note, held for a long time, perfectly steady, like the hum of a dying machine. On Tuesday, the boat came to take Dr. Morriston to the mainland. He needed to buy food, paper, and ink. Before he left, he stood by the front door and looked at Mary. "I will be gone for 6 hours," he said. "Remember the rules. I know exactly how he behaves. If you change anything, I will know." Then he walked out into the fog. Mary waited until the boat was just a small speck on the gray water. Then she turned and looked up the stairs. She was alone in the stone house with the boy. The silence felt heavier now that the doctor was gone. It felt like the house was waiting for something. Mary walked up to the third floor. She told herself she just wanted to check on the temperature. The wind was howling outside, and she worried the room was cold. She walked to the iron door. She looked through the small glass square. Thomas was sitting in the corner. He was staring at a patch of sunlight on the white wall. As the sun moved outside, the light moved on the wall. Thomas turned his head to follow it. He watched the light like it was a living thing. He didn't blink. Mary felt a deep sadness in her chest. He looked so small. He looked like a prisoner who didn't know he was in prison. She took the paper with the rules out of her pocket. Rule 1. Never speak to the child. Mary crumpled the paper in her hand. The doctor was miles away. One word wouldn't hurt. One word might save him. "Thomas," she whispered. Her voice was soft, but in the quiet hallway it sounded like a shout. Inside the room, the boy froze. He didn't jump. He didn't look scared. He just stopped moving. Slowly, very slowly, he turned his head until he was looking right at the window. Right at her. "Thomas?" she said again. "It's okay." Thomas stood up. He walked to the door. His movements were smooth and silent. He stood on the other side of the glass, just inches away from Mary's face. His eyes were dark and flat. He opened his mouth. "Thomas," he said. Mary smiled. He knew his name. But then he spoke again. "Dash is dash-o-dash-K." Mary's smile faded. The voice wasn't his. It was her voice. He had copied her sound perfectly. He copied the pitch, the whisper, even the way her breath hit the glass. It sounded like a recording of Mary coming from his throat. You can talk." Mary asked. Thomas tilted his head to the side, like a bird watching a worm. "You can talk," he repeated. He was just echoing her. "My name is Mary," she said, trying to reach him. "I am your friend." Thomas stared at her mouth as it moved. He was studying how her lips worked. "Marie," he said, but this time the voice changed. It dropped low and cold. It was Dr. Morriston's voice. "Marie, nurse, subject 7. Mary stepped back, her skin crawling. He had heard them talking. He had been listening to everything through the walls. Then Thomas raised his hand. He pressed his small, pale palm against the thick glass. Mary felt her heart break. He wanted to touch. He wanted a connection. Dr. Morriston was wrong. The boy was lonely. Slowly, Mary raised her own hand. She pressed it against the cold glass, lining it up with his hand. "I'm here," she whispered. Thomas looked at her hand. Then he looked at his own hand. He didn't smile. He didn't look comforted. He took his finger and traced the outline of her hand on the glass. He was checking the size. He was counting her fingers. He looked her in the eyes. His face was totally empty. 5, he said in a flat, dead voice. Bone, skin, warm. He wasn't holding her hand. He was inspecting it. He didn't see a person. He saw a biology lesson. Mary pulled her hand away as if the glass were hot. She realized then that the doctor hadn't just made the boy lonely. He had made him something else. Something that knew the words for things, but not what they meant. Dr. Morriston came back as the sun went down. The fog was thicker now, covering the windows like a white curtain. He didn't say hello to Mary. He walked straight up the stairs to the third floor. Mary stood in the kitchen, her hands shaking. She washed the same plate 3 times. She heard his heavy footsteps stop directly above her head. She held her breath and waited. 10 minutes later, the footsteps came back down. Dr. Morriston stood in the doorway of the kitchen. He was holding his notebook. He looked very calm, which made him look very dangerous. "Come with me," he said. Mary followed him to his study. The fire was out. The room was freezing. Dr. Morriston sat behind his desk and cleaned his glasses with a small cloth. "I told you the rules, Miss Holt," he said softly. "I didn't open the door," Mary said quickly. "I promised I wouldn't open it." "You didn't have to," Morriston said. He put his glasses back on. "I went to the viewing glass just now. Thomas looked at me." "And do you know what he said?" Mary didn't answer. The silence in the room was heavy. "He said, 'It is okay.' But he didn't say it like a child. He said it with your voice. He said it with your tremble. He recorded you, Miss Holt, like a parrot records a whistle." Mary looked at the floor. "I just wanted to be kind." He looked so sad. "Kindness is noise," Morriston said sharply. "You think you gave him comfort? No, you gave him data. You gave him a new pattern to study. Now his mind is messy. Now he is thinking about Mary, instead of thinking about nothing. You have contaminated the experiment." He stood up and walked to a strange machine in the corner of the room. It was a metal box with a large hand crank on the side and a copper wire running up into the ceiling. "What are you going to do?" Mary asked, stepping forward. "I have to fix your mistake," Morriston said. "I have to perform a reset. We have to wash the new words away." He grabbed the handle of the machine. "Please," Mary said, "don't hurt him." "Pain is a teacher," Morriston said. He turned the crank. A loud, high-pitched screeching sound burst from the machine. It sounded like metal grinding on metal, but much louder. The sound traveled up the wire, into the walls, and straight up to the third floor. It was a terrible, piercing noise designed to make it impossible to think or sleep. "This will play all night," Morriston shouted over the noise. He sat back down at his desk and picked up a book, acting like nothing was happening. By morning, he will be exhausted. His brain will shut down to protect itself. He will forget your name. He will forget your voice. He will be empty again. Mary ran out of the room. She ran to her bedroom and covered her ears with her pillow. But she could still hear the screeching sound vibrating through the stone walls. She lay there in the dark, crying. She realized then that the boy wasn't just a prisoner. He was a machine that the doctor could turn off and on. And worst of all, the boy was suffering right now because she had tried to be nice. Her kindness had become his torture. The screeching machine finally stopped when the sun came up. The silence that followed was heavy, like the air after a thunderstorm. Mary hadn't slept at all. She felt sick, her head pounding with the memory of that terrible mechanical scream. When she went downstairs, Dr. Morriston was eating breakfast. He looked refreshed. He buttered his toast carefully. "The subject is reset," he said, not looking up. "You may resume the feeding schedule. But remember, Miss Holt, you are a ghost. You do not exist to him. If you exist, you cause pain." Mary took the tray of oatmeal upstairs. Her hands shook so much the spoon rattled against the bowl. She knelt by the iron door and pushed the drawer open. She didn't want to look, but she couldn't help herself. She peeked through the glass. Thomas was sitting in the exact center of the room. He was facing the door. His eyes were open, but they were glazed over, like he was looking at something 1,000 miles away. He didn't move toward the food. He didn't blink. He looked broken. For the next 3 days, Mary was a ghost. She moved silently. She didn't speak. She fed him. She washed the dishes. She cleaned the floors. She tried to make herself invisible so Thomas wouldn't be punished again. But the house felt different now. Before, it was just quiet. Now, it felt like it was listening. Every time Mary walked down the hallway, she felt a pressure on the back of her neck. When she sat in her room at night, she imagined Thomas's dark eyes staring through the floorboards above her. She started to realize that while Dr. Morriston was studying Thomas was studying them. On the 4th day, Dr. Morriston called her into the study. He held a large brass key in his hand. "The sanitation in the room is ... lacking," he said. "The air vent is clogged with dust. It needs to be cleaned. I cannot fit in the crawl space. You must go in." Mary's heart stopped. Go in? Inside the room? Yes, but the rules are stricter now. You will enter. You will clean the vent in the corner. You will not look at him. You will not speak to him. If he approaches you, you will ring this bell. He handed her a small silver handbell. Do not let him touch you. They walked up to the 3rd floor together. Dr. Morriston unlocked the heavy iron door. The sound of the lock turning was loud and harsh. He pulled the door open. The smell hit Mary first. It wasn't a dirty smell. It smelled like bleach and stale air, dry and chemical. The room was blindingly white. The light came from a skylight high above, filtered through thick frosted glass. "Quickly," Morriston ordered. He stayed in the hallway, watching. Mary stepped inside. The air was freezing. Thomas was standing in the far corner, facing the wall, his back to her. He was wearing a thin white shirt and pants. He looked so fragile. Mary hurried to the other corner where the vent was. She stood on a small stool and began wiping the dust from the metal grate. Her back was to Thomas, but she could feel him. She could feel his presence like a cold wind. Scratch. She froze. The sound was soft, coming from the wall near the floor where Thomas was standing. She risked a glance over her shoulder. Thomas hadn't moved. He was still facing the wall. But his hand was moving. He was holding something small and sharp, maybe a button or a piece of fingernail, and he was scratching the plaster. Mary looked closer at the wall near her own feet. The white paint was covered in tiny, faint lines. She squinted. They weren't just scratches. They were a map. It was a drawing of the house. But it was strange. It didn't show the rooms or the doors. It showed the inside of the walls. It showed the pipes carrying water. It showed the wires carrying electricity. It showed the beams and the studs. It was a blueprint of the skeleton of the house. How? He had never left this room. He had never seen the pipes. "The water tells me," a voice whispered. Mary nearly fell off the stool. The voice was right beside her ear. She spun around. Thomas was standing right behind her. He had moved across the room without making a single sound. He was looking up at her with those bottomless black eyes. "The water shakes the walls," Thomas whispered. His voice was flat, devoid of emotion. "The wires hum when the light is on. I hear them. I hear where they go." He pointed a pale finger at the floor, directly at the spot where Mary's room would be 1 floor down. "You sleep there," he said. "I hear your heart. It beats ... fast." "Miss Holt," Dr. Morriston shouted from the doorway. "Get out. Now." Mary scrambled off the stool and ran for the door. She didn't look back. She rushed into the hallway, and Morriston slammed the iron door shut, locking it with a heavy clank. He grabbed Mary by the arm. His face was pale. "Did he touch you?" He hissed. "No," Mary gasped, shaking. "He ... He spoke. He knows where the pipes are. He drew a map." Morriston let go of her arm. He looked at the door, and for the first time, Mary saw fear in the doctor's eyes. "He is mapping his cage," Morriston whispered. "He is looking for the weak spots." That night, Dr. Morriston stopped acting like a scientist. He started acting like a jailer. He didn't eat dinner. Instead, Mary heard him hammering. He was nailing boards over the air vents in the hallway. He went to the basement and turned off the water pipes that led to the third floor. He cut the electrical wires that went upstairs. "He listens to the vibrations," Morriston muttered when Mary passed him in the hall. He looked sweaty and pale. "If I cut the lines, he is blind. He is deaf. He will be safe again." "Safe?" Mary asked. "You're cutting off his heat, his water." "Doctor, he is a child, not a monster. He is not a child." Morriston shouted. It was the first time he had raised his voice. "He is an evolution, but he is learning too fast. Go to your room, Miss Holt. Lock the door. Do not come out until morning." Mary went to her room, but she didn't lock the door. She waited. She waited until the hammering stopped. She waited until she heard the heavy door of Morriston's bedroom click shut. Then she crept out into the dark hallway. She needed to understand. She needed to know who Thomas really was. She went downstairs to the study. The moon was bright outside, shining through the fog, giving just enough light to see. She opened the doctor's desk drawers. They were locked. She tried the filing cabinet. Locked. Then she saw a thick leather book sitting right on top of the desk. It was labeled Subject 7, Origin. Mary opened it. Her hands were shaking. She held it up to the moonlight. The first page was dated 7 years ago. October 14th, 1897. The mother is dead. She died giving birth. She was weak, emotional. She worried too much. Her fear killed her. I will not let the boy be like her. I will not let him be weak. Mary froze. The mother. Morriston wasn't just a doctor hired to watch an orphan. He was the father. Thomas was his own son. She turned the pages. December 1899. Subject 7 shows signs of attachment. He cries when I leave. This is a failure. I must remove myself. I have built the quiet room. No color. No sound. No father. Only the rules, July 1901. The isolation is working. He does not cry. He does not laugh. He sits for hours. He is becoming pure. He is becoming a mind without the sickness of feelings. Mary felt sick to her stomach. This wasn't science. This was grief. A madman had lost his wife, and instead of loving his son, he had locked him away so he wouldn't have to feel the pain of losing him too. He thought he was protecting the boy from the sickness of emotion, but he was just protecting himself. Suddenly, a loud clang echoed through the house. It came from inside the walls. It sounded like a pipe being hit with a metal bar. Clang, clang, clang. It was a rhythm. 3 hits, then a pause, then 3 hits. Mary looked up. The single gas lamp in the hallway flickered. Then the sound changed. It wasn't metal on metal anymore. It was a tearing sound, a ripping sound, like something was pulling the insides of the house apart. ZZT. The gas lamp sparked and went dark. The moonlight from the window suddenly vanished as a heavy shutter outside slammed closed. Mary was in total darkness. She stood frozen in the study. The silence was back, but it was different now. It wasn't empty silence. It was the silence of a hunter waiting. From the heating vent on the floor, the only one Morriston hadn't nailed shut yet, a voice drifted up from the basement. It wasn't the doctor's voice, and it wasn't Mary's voice. It was a voice that sounded like grinding stones. A voice that had never been used for conversation, only for stating facts. Mary stood perfectly still in the dark study. The voice coming from the floor vent had been quiet, but it filled the room with dread. "Thomas?" She whispered. There was no answer. just the sound of wind whistling through the pipes. She realized then what had happened. Dr. Morriston had nailed boards over the vents in the hallway. He had locked the heavy iron door, but he had forgotten the vent inside the room, the one behind the bed. Thomas was small. Thomas was thin. Thomas was escaping through the veins of the house. Mary fumbled in the dark until her hands found a box of matches on the desk. She struck one. The small flame flared up, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. She walked out into the hallway. The house was a tomb. "Doctor?" she called out. She heard a crash from the kitchen, then the sound of glass breaking. Mary ran toward the sound, shielding her match with her hand. When she reached the kitchen doorway, she stopped. Dr. Morriston was standing in the middle of the room. He was holding a large oil lantern in one hand and a heavy fireplace poker in the other. He was spinning around, looking at the corners of the ceiling. He looked wild. "He's out," Morriston whispered. His voice was shaking. "I checked the door. It's still locked. But the room is empty." "He went through the vents," Mary said. "He is in the walls, Doctor." Morriston looked at the ceiling. "The walls, ... yes. He knows them. He mapped them." Suddenly, a cupboard door swung open slowly. Creak. Morriston swung the iron poker, smashing a jar of flour on the counter. White dust exploded into the air like smoke. "Show yourself," Morriston screamed. "I command you." "I am your father." "Father," a voice echoed. It didn't come from the cupboard. It came from the dumbwaiter, the small elevator used to move food between floors. The little wooden door of the dumbwaiter slid open just an inch. Morriston froze. He raised the lantern. Inside the dark shaft of the dumbwaiter, two eyes reflected the light. They were low down, near the floor. "Father is a variable," the voice said from the shaft. "Father causes ... noise. I am trying to protect you." Morriston yelled. He took a step toward the dumbwaiter. "Come out, Thomas. The experiment isn't finished." "Experiment is ... flawed," Thomas replied. His voice was getting stronger. It sounded less like a parrot and more like a judge. "Isolation creates ... weakness. I need ... control." Snap. A sound came from the basement below them. The sound of a valve turning. Then a hissing noise began. It started quiet and got louder. HSSSSSSS. Mary sniffed the air. It smelled sharp and rotten. "Gas," she gasped. He turned on the gas lines. "He's trying to kill us," Morriston said, his eyes going wide. "No," Mary said, realizing the terrifying truth. "He doesn't know what killing is. He knows you cut his heat. So he is fixing it. He is filling the house with gas to make it warm. He doesn't know it will poison us. He doesn't understand death." Morriston dropped the poker. "He's just solving a problem. Logic. Pure logic." "We have to get out," Mary said, grabbing Morriston's arm. "We have to get to the boat." "No." Morriston pulled away. "I built him. I will not run from him." He lunged toward the open dumbwaiter door, reaching into the darkness to grab his son. Dr. Morriston leaned into the dark dumbwaiter shaft. "Thomas," he screamed, "come to me." From the darkness, a small hand shot out. It wasn't a child's hand reaching for a hug. It was a claw. Thomas grabbed Dr. Morriston by his tie. The boy was incredibly strong, the strength of someone who had done nothing but isometric exercises against a wall for 7 years. With a violent jerk, Thomas pulled. Dr. Morriston's head slammed against the top of the wooden frame with a sickening crack. He went limp instantly. Then the boy pulled again, dragging the unconscious doctor halfway into the small elevator shaft. "No!" Mary screamed. She grabbed Morriston's legs, trying to pull him back. But the dumbwaiter ropes groaned. The pulley system engaged. Thomas wasn't just pulling his father in. He was hoisting the elevator up. Mary lost her grip. Dr. Morriston's body was sucked into the wall, disappearing up the dark shaft along with the boy. The little wooden door slammed shut. Click, the lock engaged from the inside. Mary stood alone in the gas-filled kitchen. She could hear the elevator rumbling up inside the wall, going up to the 3rd floor. To the quiet room. She coughed. The gas was getting thicker. Her head started to spin. If she stayed here, she would fall asleep and never wake up. She ran to the back door. It was locked. She tried the window, painted shut. She grabbed one of the heavy iron pans from the stove and swung it at the window glass. Smash! The cold night air rushed in, mixing with the rotten smell of gas. Mary climbed through the broken window and fell onto the wet grass outside. She gasped, filling her lungs with clean, freezing air. The fog was so thick she couldn't see the ocean, but she could hear it crashing against the rocks below. She looked back at the house. It looked like a giant tombstone in the mist. She knew she should run. The boat was at the dock. She could leave. She could go back to the mainland and tell the police. But then she looked up at the 3rd floor window. A light had turned on. Dr. Morriston had cut the wires, but Thomas had fixed them. The boy was rebuilding his world. Through the high window, Mary saw a silhouette. It was Thomas. He was standing there, looking down at her. And next to him, slumped in a chair, was the shadow of Dr. Morriston. Thomas raised his hand and placed it against the glass. He wasn't trapping the doctor. He was keeping him. He was putting his father into the collection. Mary knew the truth then. The experiment hadn't failed. It had worked too well. The doctor wanted a human who was pure logic void of emotion. He got one. And pure logic dictates that if something is broken, you fix it. If a variable causes noise, you remove it. Thomas was just cleaning his room. Mary turned to the dark, churning ocean. The path to the dock was to her left. Freedom, safety, life. But she didn't turn left. She remembered the boy's voice. Father is a variable. He would kill the doctor. Not out of hate, but because the doctor was unnecessary. He's just a child, Mary whispered to herself. He's just a lonely child. She couldn't leave him to become a murderer. She couldn't let the darkness win completely. Mary Holt took a deep breath of the salty air. She turned away from the ocean. She walked back to the broken window, and she climbed back into the house. The kitchen smelled terrible. The gas was heavy in the air, tasting like old eggs and metal. Mary grabbed a towel, soaked it in water from the sink, and tied it tight around her face. She found the gas valve in the pantry. It was old and rusty, but she used both hands and pulled hard. With a loud creak, it turned off. The hissing sound stopped, but the house was not silent. Above her, the floorboards were vibrating. A low hum like a giant bee was coming from the walls. Thomas had turned the electricity back on, but he had done something to it. The power was surging. The light bulbs in the hallway were buzzing and flickering, brighter than they should be. Mary walked to the stairs. Her legs felt heavy. Every step was a fight against her own fear. She wasn't just walking upstairs. She was walking into a machine that was being run by a 7-year-old boy. When she reached the 2nd floor, she saw Dr. Morriston's study. The door was open. Papers were scattered everywhere. The leather journal, the one about the experiment, was gone. She kept climbing. The air on the 3rd floor was cold. The buzzing sound was loudest here. At the end of the hall, the heavy iron door stood closed. It looked just like it always did, a dark metal barrier between the world and the boy. Mary walked up to it. She didn't have a key. Dr. Morriston had the key in his pocket when he was pulled into the wall. She pressed her face to the small glass window. Inside, the room was blindingly white. The electric lights overhead were humming loudly. Dr. Morriston was sitting in the middle of the room. He was tied to his own wooden chair. But it wasn't rope holding him. It was thick, black electrical wire, wrapped around his chest and arms, tight and neat. He was awake. His glasses were gone. His eyes were wild with terror. He was screaming, but the sound couldn't get through the thick walls. Thomas stood next to him. The boy looked calm. He was holding the leather journal in one hand and a pen in the other. He wasn't hurting his father. He was watching him. Dr. Morriston struggled against the wires. He shouted something at the boy. Thomas didn't flinch. He just watched his father's face. Then he looked down at the journal and wrote something. Mary felt a cold shock hit her stomach. She recognized the movement. It was exactly what Dr. Morriston used to do. Thomas was taking notes. The boy had learned his lesson perfectly. He wasn't mad at his father. He was just switching places. The doctor was now the subject. The subject was now the doctor. Mary banged on the glass with her fist. "Thomas!" she shouted through the heavy door. "Open this door. Let him go." Inside the room, Thomas stopped writing. He turned his head slowly. He looked at Mary. There was no anger in his eyes. There was no love either. Just a cold, flat curiosity. He walked to the door. He stood on the other side of the glass. "No," he said. His voice was muffled but clear. "Why?" Mary begged. "He is your father. He is—" "Loud," Thomas said. "He is ... broken. I am fixing him. I am teaching him to be quiet." Thomas raised the journal so Mary could see the page. On the paper, in shaky, childish handwriting, were 3 words. Mary stared at the boy through the glass. The notebook in his hand, subject 1. Fear was the most terrifying thing she had ever seen. It meant he wasn't acting out of anger. He was acting out of curiosity. "Thomas," Mary said, trying to keep her voice steady, "the experiment is over. It's time to stop." Thomas looked at her through the glass. "Experiment is evolving," he said. He turned back to his father. Dr. Morriston was gasping for air, the wires cutting into his chest. Thomas reached out and touched the wire. He wasn't checking the knot. He was feeling the vibration of his father's heartbeat through the cable. "Heart rate ... elevated," Thomas whispered. He wrote it down. Mary looked around the hallway. She needed a way in. The door was solid iron. The lock was heavy. But then she remembered the vents. Dr. Morriston had nailed boards over the ones in the hallway, but Thomas had ripped them open to escape. She looked up. The vent above the door was open. It was small, too small for a man, but maybe big enough for her. She dragged a heavy wooden table from the hallway to the door. She climbed up. The metal grate of the vent was hanging by one screw. She pulled it off. The hole was dark and dusty. Inside the room, Thomas heard the noise. He looked up at the vent. For the first time, his face changed. His eyebrows pulled together. It wasn't anger. It was confusion. A variable he hadn't planned for. "Mary," he said, "you are interfering." "I'm coming in, Thomas," she said. She squeezed her shoulders into the vent. It was tight. The metal scraped her arms. She kicked her legs, pushing herself forward. She crawled over the top of the doorframe and looked down into the white room. It was a 10-foot drop. She took a breath and pushed herself out. Thud. She landed hard on the white tile floor. Her ankle twisted, sending a sharp bolt of pain up her leg. She cried out, falling to her knees. Thomas didn't move to help her. He stepped back. He held his pen like a small weapon. "You are damaged," he observed. Mary forced herself to stand up, leaning on the wall. She was inside now. She was in the cage with the tiger and the trainer. "Let him go," Mary said. "He is dangerous," Thomas said. "He makes noise. He hurts." "He was wrong to hurt you," Mary said softly. "But hurting him back doesn't fix it. It just makes you the same as him." Thomas tilted his head. "Same?" "Yes." He locked you up because he was afraid. Now you are locking him up because you are afraid." "I am not afraid," Thomas stated. "I am logical." "No," Mary said, taking a step closer. "Look at your hand." Thomas looked down. His hand, the one holding the pen, was trembling. "Just a tiny bit. That's fear, Thomas. You're shaking. You're scared because you don't know what happens next. You've never been in control before." Thomas stared at his shaking hand. It was a biological reaction he couldn't control. It was a flaw. Dr. Morriston groaned in the chair. "Thomas, please, Thomas looked at his father, then at his shaking hand, then at Mary. The logic was breaking down. The variables were too messy. Suddenly, the lights in the room buzzed loudly. ZZT. They flared brighter, blindingly white. "System overload," Thomas whispered. He looked at the large fuse box on the wall, the one that controlled the whole room. Sparks were flying from it. He had pushed the power too high. "It's going to catch fire," Mary realized. "Thomas, we have to leave, now." Thomas didn't move. He stood between the burning fuse box and his father, paralyzed by a world that refused to follow his rules. The sparks from the fuse box hit the pile of dry papers on the floor, the doctor's notes, the charts, the data. They caught fire instantly. The white room, which had been cold and sterile for 7 years, was suddenly filled with hot orange light. "Thomas," Mary screamed over the buzzing electricity. "The key. Do you have the key?" Thomas didn't answer. He was staring at the fire. The flames were dancing, unpredictable, chaotic. They didn't follow a pattern. For a boy raised on strict order, the fire was mesmerizing and terrifying. He was watching his world burn, and he didn't know the rule for this. Mary lunged forward. She grabbed Dr. Morriston's chair and tried to pull it, but it was too heavy with the man tied to it. The smoke was getting thick, gathering at the ceiling and banking down like a black fog. "Thomas!" Mary grabbed the boy's shoulder and shook him. "Logic. Use logic. If we stay, we cease to function. If we leave, we survive. Survival is the rule. Give me the key." Thomas blinked. The word survival cut through his trance. He reached into his pajama pocket and pulled out the heavy brass key. Mary snatched it. She didn't try to untie the wires. She limped to the heavy iron door, jammed the key into the lock, and turned it with both hands. CLANK. The bolt slid back. She threw the door open. Fresh, cool air from the hallway rushed in, feeding the fire. The flames roared up the wall. "Help me," Mary yelled at the boy. Thomas looked at his father. Then he looked at Mary. He put his notebook in his pocket. He walked to the other side of the chair. Together, the nurse and the subject, they dragged the chair across the tiles. Dr. Morriston groaned, his head lolling. They got him through the door, just as the overhead lights exploded, showering the room in glass and sparks. They dragged him down the hallway, away from the heat. Mary untied the wires with trembling fingers. The doctor fell out of the chair, coughing, barely conscious. "We have to go outside," Mary choked out. "The gas ... the whole house could go." She pulled Morriston's left arm over her shoulder. She looked at Thomas. "Take his other arm." Thomas hesitated. He looked at his father's arm like it was a foreign object, but he obeyed. He took the arm. They were a strange, broken parade. A limping woman, a half-dead man, and a blank-faced boy, stumbling down the stairs as the smoke chased them. They burst out of the front door and onto the wet grass. They didn't stop until they reached the edge of the cliffs, where the wind whipped the smoke away. Mary collapsed on the ground, gasping. Dr. Morriston lay beside her, wheezing. She looked back at the house. The fire hadn't spread to the whole building yet, but the third floor was glowing. The quiet room was burning. The cage was being destroyed. Mary looked at Thomas. He was standing at the edge of the cliff, looking out at the ocean. It was the first time he had ever seen it. He had heard it for 7 years, but he had never seen the water. He stood perfectly still, watching the giant black waves crash against the rocks. The chaos of the ocean was infinite. Mary waited for him to speak. She waited for him to ask questions, to cry, to run. Thomas turned slowly to look at her. His face was lit by the glow of the fire from the house. "The room is gone," he said. "Yes," Mary whispered. "It's gone." "You're free, Thomas." Thomas looked at the burning window, and at the vast, dark ocean, and at the unconscious father at his feet. "Free," he tested the word. It sounded hollow in his mouth. "Space is too big. Too much ... noise." He wrapped his thin arms around himself, shivering violently. He wasn't cold. He was suffering from the terror of openness. The world was too large, too loud, and too uncontrolled. Mary realized with a sinking heart that saving his life was the easy part. Saving his mind might be impossible. The fire burned itself out before dawn. The stone walls of the house held, but the 3rd floor was gutted. The cage was black ash. When the sun rose, the fog lifted. A fishing boat appeared on the horizon, a supply boat returning a day late because of the weather. The captain found them on the rocks. He didn't ask questions. He took one look at the burned window, the unconscious doctor, and the shivering boy, and he helped them onto the boat. Dr. Morriston survived. He spent 3 months in a hospital in Portland. When he woke up, he didn't speak. He stared at the wall. The doctors said it was trauma, but Mary knew the truth. He had seen his own logic turned against him, and it had broken his mind. He was now the silent one. Mary took Thomas. She couldn't send him to an orphanage. They would destroy him. So she took him to a small cabin in the woods, far away from the ocean, far away from people. She tried to teach him how to be a child. She bought him toys. He arranged them in straight lines by size. She played music. He covered his ears and hummed to block out the noise. She tried to hug him. He stood stiff as a board, waiting for the contact to end. It was hard. It was lonely. But Mary didn't give up. One evening, 6 months later, they were sitting on the porch, watching the rain. Thomas was rocking back and forth, a habit he had developed to calm himself. "The water is falling," Thomas said. "Yes," Mary said. "It's rain. It makes the flowers grow." Thomas looked at the flower bed Mary had planted. He watched a single drop of water land on a petal. "Chaos," Thomas whispered, "but ... functional." He looked at Mary. For the first time in his life, his face wasn't blank. It wasn't happy, exactly. But it was soft. He reached out his hand. He didn't touch her face. He just held his hand in the air, inches from her arm, feeling the warmth of her skin without making contact. "Mary is warm," he said. "Warm is ... good." It wasn't a hug. It wasn't love, not the way other people understood it. But for a boy made of ice and rules, it was a miracle. Mary smiled, tears rolling down her face. "Yes, Thomas. Warm is good." The aftermath. History tells us that Dr. Morriston died in an asylum in 1912. He wrote thousands of pages of nonsense numbers on the walls of his cell. Mary Holt never married. She lived in that cabin for 50 years. People in the town thought she was a recluse, with a strange, quiet son who fixed radios and never looked anyone in the eye. They didn't know who Thomas was. They didn't know that the quiet man who walked into town once a week to buy graph paper was the survivor of the Morriston experiment. Thomas died in 1978. When they cleared out the cabin, they found the walls of his room. They were covered in drawings. Not blueprints of pipes or wires. They were drawings of Mary, thousands of them. Mary reading, Mary sleeping, Mary gardening, Mary smiling. And at the bottom of every single drawing, written in neat, perfect block letters was the same note: variable, kindness, result, survival. We often think that freedom means escaping a cage. But Mary Holt taught us that sometimes freedom means staying in the cage with someone else, just so they don't have to be alone in the dark. Did Mary save Thomas? Or did she just give him a different kind of life? That is for you to decide. But one thing is certain. On that cold night in 1904, when she turned back from the boat, she proved that the most powerful force in the human mind isn't fear, and it isn't logic. It's the choice to stay.